brief by way of background, we've been in business for, I guess, about 14 years now. Strictly public education in Texas. We represent districts with about 1.2 million students. About 25% of the students in all of Texas use our tools for some reason or other. Our customers are the school districts. Other than that, Tim has lost most of his hair working with the legislature over the last 8 years, trying to make sense out of public education, both the resource side and the academic side. Not really working greatly, but we're still trying. Just to give an example, one of the problems that he has tried to work is the CEI, which is how the money gets allocated, since we are going to talk finance today. And I don't know if we've done the calculation for Dallas, but I know that if they would have corrected the CEI to do what it's supposed to do, which
help us with acronyms.
It is the cost of
so we have CEI means something else.
Index, which is the adjustment that's made, the first adjustment that's made to the basic allotment. So everybody gets this much, and then depending if you're in a high-cost area or low-cost area, it gets multiplied by something. But that multiplier is wrong, and that fact, because it doesn't account for the differences in salary. So that cost Houston $70 million in the last go-around annually. So it wouldn't be that much for Dallas, but it would be a bunch. But suffice it to say, there are obstacles that could be addressed through proper analysis that we're still working on. But I guess if there's anything unique about ERG and why we might be here, and hopefully of use to all you folks in looking at performance, is we do two things that are, I would say, different from what most people are used to seeing. One thing, we integrate resources to outcomes, because really all spending has to do with educating students better. So whether it's for buses or food or whatever, you're always trying to educate better. So all expenses have to be basically related to some academic outcome. And the second thing is ranking performance. And you know, everybody is kind of buried in data, raw results, raw outcomes, but you can't compare or rank on raw outcomes because they're so driven by demographics. But if you adjust for demographics, you can compare Houston with Dallas, with Highland Park, with Brownsville. So then you know, everyone understands ranking. And so those things help put the data into a more, what I say, understandable form. So let's just kind of walk through the system. I guess first of all, performance is relative. There's a lot of ways to define performance. One of the outcomes of the, quote, independent school districts is people tend to develop their own goals, their own standards, their own, you know, what's good and what's not good. And the problem with that is that you lose relative performance. And so we really look at performance relative to how the next person is. You cannot declare yourself a success. You have to define your success by your performance relative to how everybody else performs. So everything really within our framework of looking at data is relative performance. And what is the relative performance of Dallas? We use a performance matrix, which you see up here, which tracks performance in 2 dimensions. The x-axis is cost. How much?
Hold on a second, because we had, all right, so we do have the updated handouts versus what we had Friday. Okay, thank you.
The x-axis is cost. So every dot that you see there is a school district, and we group by size. Those are the 200 largest school districts. They represent 4 million students. If you took these school districts outside of Texas, they would be bigger than any state except California. So this is a very strong statistical population. The dots on the left, the quadrants 1-1 through 4-1, spend the least amount of money. The dots on the right spend the most. And the money is basically adjusted for regional cost difference, assuming that it is more expensive to hire teachers in Dallas than it is in Brownsville or Abilene. But our presumption is just because you pay more for a teacher doesn't make that teacher better or worse. So a teacher is a teacher. So we adjust for regional cost differences, and we adjust for demographics because we know that money flows with economically disadvantaged students. So you have to account for that when you're comparing performances, or you don't have a level playing field. So we've leveled the playing field, and now all those districts on the left spend the least, those districts on the right spend the most. The shocking thing is the difference in spending between the left and the right is $5,000 per student. The most expensive versus the least expensive. Enormous amount of money when the average spending in operation services may be around $7,500. But that's the way the system works. It's not a definition of who's efficient and not. It's just a definition of how poor we are at allocating money. So if we fix that system, you wouldn't see that divergence. The academic axis is the y-axis. The districts on the bottom have the highest achievement relative to their demographics. The districts across the top have the lowest achievement. So in our system, because it's based on ranking, it's the inverse of what you normally see. Our system, you want to be down and to the left. Normally you want to see up and to the right, which is why the box down and to the left is green. The green districts in the green box are we call best practice districts because they have two characteristics. Their academic outcomes are better than expected, given their demographics, and they spend less money than we would expect, given their demographics. So they achieve high academic outcomes at lower than expected cost. And then all the other quadrants have, one or none of those characteristics. For example, those in the red box have lower than expected outcomes at higher than expected cost. And I won't go into the detail because it's more detailed than is appropriate for this meeting, but normally when one would see this, they'd say, oh yeah, the districts down to the lower left are like Highland Park and Allen and Alamo Heights, and the districts up in the upper right, they're going to be Brownsville and El Paso and Clint. That's not true at all. It doesn't spread by demographics or percent economic disadvantage. And so generally nobody knows who those, I think 11 now are in the 1-1 box. No matter how many times we've done this, no matter how many places, if you hadn't seen our system, you're not going to guess who's what we call the 1-1 or the best districts. And when we did this in Austin a couple of years ago, and there were only 7 in there, and we asked, they had everybody, the governor's people, the senator's people, the TEA, and we showed them this, what you see, and says, give me one of those 7 districts in the 1-1 box. And they couldn't guess one. And my point is, do you think the people who set the policy for public education in Texas should know who the best people are? The best districts are? I would think that would be an advantage. If you want to be a good golfer, don't you want to know who's the best? So anyway, so we think that the understanding performance is very, very important. We are not a rating system. We don't say exemplary, recognized, or whatever the new terms are. We're just saying who's doing the best job given the resources that they have. So to that, we say you can see you're a 3-1 district. 3rd quartile academically and 1st quartile in terms of spending. The good news, whether you like that or not, that's where you are. That's if somebody said, how am I doing? Well, I'm a 3-1. That answers the question, how are we doing? The other important question is, how are you moving?
Questions. Sorry, can I hop in? These schools are in the 1-1 box. Do they fluctuate, or is it usually the same amount of the same schools, the same school district? I mean, they're always in there. And so
there's actually at this time, this is about the 7th or 8th year. At one point, only one district had been in the 1-1 box every year. Last year, they dropped out. This year, they got back. So none of those dots have been in there every year. So the volatility, it's a great question.
Are you able to say what district that is? Or is
that? It's in.
Is it later? We're gonna have to read all this.
Well,
if it's in here, I'll read it. That's fine.
Yeah, and I can tell you, but the point is that there is volatility. For example, if you find an exemplary school district or exemplary campus, once they get there, they tend to stay there. If they go from acceptable to recognized, once they get there, they tend to stay there. The real question is, if I'm 2 years in a row recognized, did I get better or not? Well, how do you know? And the fact is, you don't know. In a ranking system, if I was ranked 30th last year and 15th this year, did I get better? Yeah. You don't need a training class to know that. So that's the power of ranking, as long as you have a level playing field.
Excuse me, to answer Justin's question, the handout we had emailed on Friday shows the current districts, and then I pulled what we were shown last year, which is 2 years previous. So I'll just pass these back and forth or circulate them later. Go ahead, Susan.
Are you going to talk about what your performance measures are?
Yeah, let me talk now. I explained cost. It was basically operating services, which we don't include capital because capital isn't comparable. How many buildings you're building is a function of how fast you're growing. So we just look at operating services expenses, which is what we think what it costs to educate a student. On the academic side, we look at 5 performance measures. We look at Met Standard %, commended %, 4-year graduation rate, which is very rigorous definition. Okay, so you have to get a student out in 4 years. It's the only measure that includes both cost and outcomes. Because if I can get a kid out in 4 years, it's cheaper than 5. Not to you, it's revenue to you, but for the overall cost of education, if you give them out in 12 versus 13, it's less expensive. And then mean SAT and ACT scores. Once again, all those are adjusted for demographics. Okay, so it's an index based on your ranking in all 5. So you get ranked between 1 to 200 in all 5, and then you get an overall rank. Okay, so you may be number 1, you may be 50th academically overall, but number 1 in graduation rate, that kind of thing.
Meeting progress is that's the AYP stuff that's based on tax or star or whatever.
We don't use AYP. We don't use progress per se. And once again, AYP is all raw data, so it's pretty useless. And everybody knows that. If you don't adjust for demographics, looking at raw numbers, all it does is in advance who's going to win.
So when you're talking about meeting performance standard,
what we do is basically we plot the data and say, give me the pass rates for all the districts as a function of their demographics. Pass rate versus economically disadvantaged. We regress that, and that is what is the best fit line, and that determines expected value. For example, if I am 6'1", I have an expected value for weight. I should be 185 pounds. Where did that come from? Exactly that same process. They took males, they took all the heights, they took all the weights, they did a regression. They said if you're 6'1", you should weigh They didn't say if you weigh 180 how tall you should be. They say if you're 6'1", this is how much you should weigh. So what we do the same thing. We say if you have 80% economically disadvantaged kids, your pass rate should be 76%. And every year we do that same regression, and we do it for the graduation rate. So the performance is defined by the population itself. That's what we mean by relative to your peers. There isn't any magic, formula that says what we think your pass rate should be. We let the system define it, and the system define how it's moving from year to year. Okay, so number 1, now we know where we are. On the right, we see 3 green arrows. And like I say, the second important thing is how are you moving? So recognizing is that, you could have arrived at the same destination 2 different ways. You could be improving or you could be declining. Well, if you're a campus in that situation, your strategies would be different if you are improving or are you declining. It would also be true if you're a district. Are you improving or are you declining? So you have to know not just where you are, which is what our accountability system tells us, but how you're moving. So the good news for Houston for Dallas, is as you can see, your indices are positive, all 3 indices, and you can see there's a financial performance index where you're ranked 45th. You made a massive jump of 42 positions. Academic performance index, you're 118th, you improved by 7. The educational productivity index is the hypotenuse. It's the top index. It has basically said, how do I take resources and produce outcomes? Okay, and you're ranked 58th in that out of the 200. Once again, the 200 largest districts in Texas. And some people have an index that's driven by low cost. Some people have an index that's driven by high academics. The number 1, which is Hershey-Lewis Bedford, who's been number 1 5 years in a row, is driven by a balance. They're pretty low cost and they're pretty high academics. In fact, they're very high academics. This year they became number 2 in the whole state. Okay, everybody kind of get the framework, where we are, how we're moving? So the next question is, okay, we know we're kind of doing better financially, but give me a long-term picture. What really has been happening in terms of finances in Dallas over time? So we tracked the data from 2003 all the way through 2012, which is the most current data that we have. And what you see here on the left, the blue line is the PAC, that's the 200. The red line is Dallas's index. The green is just a smoothing of that red line. And what you see, those minus numbers, minus means that you are spending, for example, $667 less than we would expect given your demographics, or 961. So in most cases, except for 1 year, Dallas has been below the PAC, which means they're spending less than we would expect. But the message that you take away from here is what? Oh, huge volatility. Generally in any performance, what you're looking for, Baldrige concept, continuous improvement. right? You want to get a little bit better every year. You know, you don't want to have a great year then lose it, a great year then lose it. But what you're seeing is this kind of performance. So whether we're looking at the financial performance index for Dallas, a massive district with a huge budget, or we're looking for the third grade pass rate for an elementary school, you basically, that's not a comfortable world to live in where you're bouncing up and down. So the first thing it tells me is, you know, I see where I have been. That's not necessarily when I want to go, but that's where I've been. So you have a lot of volatility. It also tells me, despite all this movement, if you look at the chart on the right, and once again, green is good. You want to be in the bottom. As you can see, you're in the first quartile. You pretty much have ended up where you started financially. Notice you were ranked 54th in 2003 and you're ranked 45th in 2012. It was a bit of a rocky journey, up and down, but nonetheless, that's where, you know, you've kind of ended up where you started. Now, this is a very coarse, you know, what can you do about overall spending? You know, we need to drill down into the details before we can make sense out of what does that really mean, but this is the big picture. Now, before I proceed, because what I'm going to talk about, and when you talk about spending in school districts, what you have to really look at is the staffing model, because that's really what you control. People drive costs in public education. And so if you want to drive efficiency or productivity, you have to work on position control. You have to work on how many people we have and what roles we put them in. You don't have that much discretion on salaries. It tends to be more market driven, but you do have discretion on how many you have. And so if that's the case, what's the axiom? Where do we have to start? How important is that incremental person? And it's often thought of in terms of how important is small class sizes, which has pretty much universal appeal, but not statistically. Okay, so what you're seeing here is one of the capabilities of the system, which basically shows these 200 districts and total staff for 2012. The red star is Dallas. So we have districts that have anywhere from a student to staff ratio of 5.5 to a student to staff ratio of 10.5. So it's 2-to-1 difference. And what we have on the left is an academic outcome. And you know, you don't have to know much statistics to know there's basically no influence between staff ratio and academic outcomes. And we can do this 100 ways until you're tired of hearing the message. But it is absolutely important that that is understood before you take any data and try to turn it into action.
This is total staff?
This happens to be total staff. I can do this with student to teacher ratio. I can do this with years of experience. You can as well. If you have access to the system, this is a 30-second exercise.
Is any of this weighted throwing the top 10 largest districts out and the bottom 10 smallest districts out to see if the large and the small skew it too much?
We can do a little better than that. We can actually do, does the district size have any pick?
Right, that's where.
And the fact is, it's 0 as well.
Okay.
So, which is good when you think about it. What you hate to say is, geez, I have to go to a large district or a small district to get good academics. That shouldn't be the case, and it's not the case.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, good question. And like I say, this is not our first dance. It's not like we have gone through a lot of analysis before we will come to this conclusion to make sure there aren't any other influences.
So if over time you've looked at this and keep getting the same result, what's the variation in student-teacher ratio that you've looked at, the variability?
12 to 18 is the sweet spot for the state. Well, no, that is the real data. Now, this is, of course, a district-wide number. You can have a class with 2 students in it, so understand we're talking, this is PEIMS data, so you can go find the same data and do the same analysis yourself if you'd like. But in Texas, for the 200 largest, the range is 12 to 18, and it's dead flat. So there's some districts with 18 that get great. Houston is one of them. They have the second highest student-to-teacher ratio in the state. They're the only urban in the 1-1 box, major urban in the 1-1 box. They're making it happen. So it's dead flat. It is not the driver. I know there's plenty of people say it is. Maybe if you have 5 kids in the class, it would be. We don't have 4 times as much money to make that happen.
Dan, you've got a question?
Yeah, I do. Hi, I'm Dan Mitchke. I'm one of the trustees, and I'm crashing this meeting.
All righty.
Invited.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question on the staff ratios. You're saying that this study is looking at a staff ratio of 12 to 1 or 18 to 1 and finding no difference. between the two. What if you carry that out to 36 to 1? Is there any? There's got to be some limit at some point where
There probably is, and I know, I know you can find a study that says 25 is the number. What we have is, in fact, the data. So we're not doing a study. We're taking PEIMS data from the districts as they actually operate, and say in that range, this is what we find. It may curve at the ends, but there's no data to support.
You're also saying that the staffing ratios don't correlate to class size necessarily. We have classes here. I mean, we're 22 to 1. We have classes with 45 kids in.
What actually drives some classes has much more to do with what class it is, and logistics and campus size and all that. But once again, before we drill down to that level, let's look at the big picture. The question is, when staffing is going to drive your costs. This is a budgeting meeting. If we're going to make any actions come out of here, we need to know, if we make an action, is it going to help or hurt? Everything has to come down to what the academic outcome is going to be.
So just to clarify, 12 to 18, is that basically all you looked at, or did you have outliers who were much higher than that? I mean, are you saying most of the state?
At the district level, if you look at these 200 districts, they report student-to-teacher ratio in PEIMS. That range reported is 12 to 18.
So nobody's higher than that?
Right, that's correct. That is correct.
You don't really know performance.
We know district
higher.
Averages.
Right.
That's all.
But I mean, if a district reported 25 to 1 and had lower or higher performance, you don't know that because you don't have that data.
Well, I mean, nobody reports it, is what I'm saying. This is 4 million students. Of the 4 million students operating in the range that you're concerned with, that's the world. So in the real world, that's the space you have to manage.
And no one goes higher than that.
Correct.
So does this take into consideration the state requested reporting where a teacher may have 5 LEPs and 5 SESs and 20 regular kids, and it's reported 3 different times and then averaged together? Because I'm hearing from Mr. Glover of our HR department that is a reporting anomaly, that they're saying that the reporting is not necessarily what is reflected in Chancery, which is our database of classes themselves. So is there an opportunity in the way the data is reported that the numbers are skewed in a way that is not beneficial to the district? In other words, if one teacher is counted 3 times and then that's averaged together, that's a much lower average than if the teacher was really counted as having 40 kids in the classroom instead of 1 of 5, 1 of 10, and 1 of 20.
For what it's worth, what I'm going to answer is I think that's going to be moot, because at the end of the day, we're going to get away from that to just look at the totals, how many teachers you've got versus how many students you have, and that's the number you really manage, not whatever PEIMS has asked you to report as a student ratio. Okay. All I'm saying is that PEIMS has a set of standards of reporting, and everybody should report to those same standards. And I'll tell you in general, because we've been in lots and lots of school districts, but when we sit down with the district administration, they'll say, "Oh yeah, that PEIMS data is wrong. We do it right, but nobody else does." And so, yeah, I mean, guess what? Data is a problem in every industry that exists. But at the top, the higher you are, probably the better the data is. At the overall spending level, pretty good number. Is there some, object codes that may be reported differently? Probably.
So Dallas is listed in this information as something like 16 to 1.
15.3.
15.3 to 1.
2013 data.
Okay, and that's just taking 9,800 teachers and comparing that to 158,000 students, and on just that macro level. That's
right. Which in my mind, the budget level where you need to be.
I suggest that we let them get through the presentation, then we'll see what our questions are at the end, and then so how's everybody feel about that? So we've got a lot of pages.
Okay, yeah, and I'll try to be brief. But the background mattered, all I'm saying. So thank you for the questions. They were quite good. So I just, kind of took apart. Once again, we looked at total staff. Let's look at how that's changing over time. And once again, we see a nice little pyramid where you ended up where you started. So, why this occur? We are not in the why business. We are in the what business. Yeah, this is what, you probably know the whys. We don't. So we're you know, you were ranked 27th in 2003 and 28th in 2013, but you went through a roller coaster ride in the meantime. That's total staff. But once again, total staff, you guys are pretty low. That's why it's low in that, which means you're efficient. You have more students per staff member. Professional staff, you're kind of on the other, and you're high. You were right in the mid, which where we expect you to be. You jump way up. Once again, 2008 was your peak year. Is that the year you guys had the? Yes. Okay. So no surprise there when you have a basically flat enrollment and high salaries and adding people. It's tough to manage. But nonetheless, the district has made very smart recovery from that. You're back to where you were. Okay. So how do we? Those are general. None of that's actionable. That's nice to know. That's a framework of understanding kind of how we got to, okay, how do we make that actionable? You know, we work with Houston a lot for years and years. So Houston, when we talk to them, we presented to their board, well, how do we do it versus Dallas? So I assume Dallas cares how they do against Houston. And this is on the academic side, because once again, all spending has to do with academic outcomes. So at the end of the day, if I'm making any spending decision, I have to know, is that going to help or harm my academic outcomes? And so it's reported here both raw and deviated. Deviated means I've adjusted for the difference in demographics between Dallas and Houston. And you can see that Dallas doesn't fare well. That's why all those bars are red. Dallas actually is better than Houston in graduation rate. Dallas is ranked 172 out of the 200, and Houston's ranked 173. Houston's always acknowledged that graduation rates their biggest problem. But in the other areas, you know, college readiness scores and the test taking, Houston is ranked much higher than is Dallas. So that's kind of the starting point for looking at what are the differences in staff. As you can see, pretty much the same story when we looked at total staff, but that's, you know, there's categories of staff, and these, by the way, are all PEIMS categories. So in the system, you can understand which groups they actually encompass by role ID, all the way down to the details. But that's, once again, more detailed than is appropriate for this meeting. And instructional staff, if you look at the top, Houston's ranked number 3 overall, and Dallas is ranked number 93rd in terms of instructional costs. So we have to put these two pieces of data together. We have to know, well, you know, how are we staffing versus what kind of outcomes are we generating? And I'll even take that to even more detail. In instructional staff, there's really 2 components. There's teachers, and there's educational aides. So once again, there's 2 things that you worry about. You have to pay a salary, and then you have to determine how many you're going to have. You don't have a whole lot of flexibility in salary. You can't, you know, as we've said many times, if you could pay a teacher $1, you should, okay, because that makes you more efficient. But you can't. But you determine how many you have, and so you can see there's a big gap in the ratios. Interestingly, you pay very similar salaries to Houston, particularly for teachers. Your aides are much more expensive. But the bottom line is this gap in instructional services basically costs Dallas $100 million. That's the difference. If you took Houston's ratios and paid Dallas salaries, the difference is $100 million. Now that's salary only. That's not benefits.
We had the previous chair of the Budget Commission came up with that same analysis and came up with $110 million.
Okay, yeah, because salary doesn't, your costs are much higher than salary. But, so the question is, you know, is that money you're giving away, or are you getting $100 million of academic benefit? Because if you are, that's fine. But if you're not, then maybe that's a decision you want to revisit. To change that, you know, to go to Houston's model, and we're now just talking instructional staff, although you can do this for the other areas as well, that doesn't happen like that. So I guess my challenge would be, well, okay, if that's something that you would see as a goal, then how would you go about making that happen? The one thing I did notice is if you look at average salaries for Dallas ISD over the last 4 or 5 years, very flat, which, you know, in a pretty much a non-inflationary to deflationary environment is fair, but it also really helps your bottom line, so to speak, because, you know, salary cost is a big driver of overall. Okay, and that's kind of the basic story, and I think you've heard that before, and it's going to be reinforced later. But another little exercise I did was, everybody knows that school districts went through a fund cut, basically, after the last legislative session and things like that. So how did your strategies compare? Because everybody had to face it, but we have an independent school district concept. So did you do the same thing as everybody else? In general, this is what happened, for example, in teacher turnover. You would have expected, with big cuts, with less teachers, we would have vastly accelerated teacher turnover, wouldn't you? I mean, that's what I kind of think. Teacher turnover simply means the teacher was there one year and not there the next. Teacher turnover went down.
Their options went down.
For whatever reason, people thought it was a greater idea not to leave. But as you can see, the average teacher turnover of the previous 7 or 8 years was pretty high, but it went down. It bounced up a little bit in 12, but basically teacher turnover, as the cuts hit, went down, and that's pretty much the same thing happened. So Dallas really mirrored what happened everywhere else. There a little bit more volatility in Dallas, but pretty much happened. Student-teacher ratio went up. Okay, now we've already visited, is that sensitive to academic outcomes or not? I think you pretty much know by now that it's not, certainly not in this range that you see. But it went up, and it went up, pretty substantially over what it had been in the past. And it went up at Dallas as well. So you guys pretty much followed the pattern there. Here's the thing that kind of stuck out just looking at the data, which is where Dallas was an anomaly. And I think I might know the reason now. Little Bird told me. But where in general, years of teaching experience statewide went up. Okay, teacher turnover goes down. Every teacher has another year. So you have a more experienced teacher staff. Not true in Dallas. Dallas basically went from 12.2 to 11.6. So, and given the fact that the most experience tends to have the most salary, that, if you're just looking for the pure financial standpoint, that bodes very well for the district. So how that happened, I don't know. But as you know, the salary base is a burden, because it increases every year. So anything you can do to manage that salary base is good. And once again, as we said, even though I didn't show the chart, years of experience versus academic outcomes is no correlation, which I think is the report card on professional development in the state of Texas as a whole. I don't think we can afford that. I hope somebody figures out a better answer. I don't have one, but that's the fact. But the more dramatic thing as I did this analysis, and I really did this for all the subcomponents of all the staffing areas, the bottom line was, in general, everybody reduced staff by a little bit. So if you had a whole lot of staff, you reduced it. If you had very little staff, you reduced it. So whether you were way on the left side of that graph with very little money to spend, like Dallas and Garland and Cy-Fair and Houston and some of the other ones, they had to cut their costs. If you were way on the right side of that graph, like Austin and Highland Park and Alamo Heights and some others, they reduced staff. But everybody pretty much reduced it the same, irrespective of the starting point. Okay, so that's the problems with an across-the-board cut, which is our legislature deigned in their infinite wisdom. But you can see the blue line here was the average, but the gap between the maximum ratio and the minimum ratio is enormous. So you can see here, you got an average of 7, but the range is between 5 and 11. So, and this is total staff. That's 80% of your costs, and you see that kind of variance. So the question becomes, if I'm designing a budget strategy, and I'm deciding, where's my limit? I mean, how far can I push before now I'm past the point, I've cut to the bone, and now I've hurt academic outcomes? I don't think anybody's got there. That's what the data tells me, because you can find somebody out there that, regardless of the category, bus drivers, aides, nurses, principals, you name it, somebody's operating at a much lower level than you are. So just data to think about. Okay, and I'll do this real quick because it's a little bit, but everywhere we go, we ask people how they did in STAR, and I guess I get a lot of blank stares. Oh, kind of, I think pretty good. Well, what do you mean? I'm not sure. because it's a complete new testing range. We've been, what's the temperature outside? Well, it's 81 today. Well, that works if everybody knows that's F. But if I came in with a totally new temperature scale and said 17.3, but I can't tell you the units, what would that even mean? Well, that's star. Okay, so now, but we kind of know the pass rates, we think, for us. But until like Friday, you didn't know what everybody else was doing. Because the real question is, we know we have less kids pass star than did. But the real question, did we lose more ground than everybody else? And did we lose? And if we did, was it in third grade, fourth grade? Was it in math? Was it in English? Was it science? So now that's really what this next series. And I won't spend more. But you can see real quickly that as far as Dallas is concerned, third grade is an issue where you're fourth quartile. Third grade math is an issue. Math, fourth grade as well. The nice thing is, level 2, by the way, is the old Met Standard. So once again, all subjects in third grade, and then fifth grade science and math. And then level 3, you guys are pretty good. There's no red in level 3. Level 3 is commended. That's the hardest level. So that's saying something, that you've got no red anywhere in commended. So this is really something that your curriculum staff uses to say, okay, where do we need to get to work? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? We did this really well. Keep it going. We got problems here. Let's go. There is a new value that never existed before. We have learned to live on Met Standard and commended, and that's been kind of how we know what's going on. They now report percent correct. And remember that from when you used to take tests as a kid? Got a 66 in that test. That's really useful information. Why haven't they reported that? So now that's being reported. So that was the first of these graphs. So that's available in the system. So now, for example, I can have two, in the old days, recognized districts. One could have a 55, one could have a 65% correct. That's a big difference. Because percent correct is a more measure of how effective my instruction is than how many kids cross the hurdle. Okay, because that's a function of how close they were to start out with. So it's always been what I would call a real poor measure of performance. It's fine for a label, because labels are fine. It's nice to know you're exemplary and all that. But at the end of the day, you have to manage through performance, not through labels. So now there's another number out there. It's very useful, and the instructional department should take care of that. And then just to conclude, at the end of the day, once again, I keep saying money has to deal with student outcomes. Well, kind of like I compare this to the world of sports, where back in the 50s and 60s, when people were drafting football players, they read the newspapers. And then when I first moved to Dallas, we used to run the Dallas Cowboys programs, and I used to have my hands on the decks of all. They used to analyze football players like nobody else did. And that's primitive compared to what they do today, because very frankly, it's a big business. And that, that's why Moneyball came out, and how we effectively, public education is no different. You can't manage by the seat of your pants. We really like this instructional program, and this is, you have to have better data. So you can't run with the data that people did 20 years ago and 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. You have to have better data. So first of all, you have to take achievement into account. Secondly, you have to take growth into account. But just let me give you some flavor of what's happening in Dallas. This is the matrix for Dallas elementary schools. So it's really revealing. It's kind of bipolar. Okay? That is, you got, sir.
Yeah, no, that was just, we got way up here and way down.
Yeah, that's why visuals are powerful. Because what it says is, in terms of staffing, because in campuses, this isn't spending, this is staff ratio. So on the right, you have very few students per staff. On the left, you have lots of students per staff. So they're more efficient, larger classes, less assistant principals, nurses, da da da. And so what you can see right now, you guys are all over the place. Some districts, for example, where we came from, Carrollton, everyone's to the left. Houston's almost all the way up to the left. Dallas is everywhere. Okay, the other thing is you got a huge concentration at the top, which is low achievement. You got a huge concentration at the bottom, which is really high achievement. So we've adjusted for demographics. So this is no longer the low achievement. We've made that adjustment. So technically, you should have the same expectations for every single campus. So why is this the case?
Did you provide the list to the schools with their quadrant?
I can. The next thing is just, what I decided is, in a strategic mode, you can't fix 100 campuses. So what you do is pick the lowest performing campuses. So I picked all campuses that were 10 or more points less in the basic measure, which is Met Standard, lower than expected, and said, start there. You get them, going. And then that'll fix your problem, because you have a lot of high-flying campuses across the bottom. But for every one of those, you've got a campus that offsets it with low performance. If Dallas wants to get better, if you want to be in the 1-1 box, then you've got to disaggregate to your campus level, do this for middle schools, do this for high schools, which we've done in other presentations, and it looks very similar, and start working the problem. And first of all, you have to have expectations. Secondly, you have to have a measurement framework that everybody buys into, and say, you know, this is where you are today, where are you going to be next year, and where are you going to be in 2 years. So that's how the system has to work. But even at that, in fact, this is just a graphical representation where I'm looking at demographics versus Met Standard. That's that curve I was telling you about, except all those dots are elementary schools in Dallas ISD. So you have a real concentration of high economically disadvantaged students. That's why all those dots are to the right. That just means 80 to 90% economically disadvantaged. But notice they populate that graph from top to bottom. At the top, anybody above that blue line are getting better than expected outcomes. Any campuses below that blue line are getting lower than expected outcomes. Well, why? Is that planned? Is that what we expect? Is that going to happen next year? So that's how you work. And that's why I said you can't go into every campus and fix that. You got to pick your target campuses. And if you fix those, it'll bring the district up. What's also interesting is the huge spread in Met Standard and very little spread in Commended. Don't know why. You guys seem to do well in that measure. Don't know why. That's for your curriculum folks to figure out. So those in my mind, if I were general in charge of elementary schools and said fix this or you're fired, that's who I'd work with. And how we then proceed, once again, you need more detail at that level. So we have those, for example, just 2 sample element, and these are no longer Dallas. I just use this as a kind of a case study where we have 2 campuses, one in the 1-1 box and one in the 3-2 box, same school district, same expectations. Why is that the case? Well, first of all, we can see that one has a 76% pass rate, one has a 96% pass rate with the same demographics. So there's basically 17 points different in Met Standard. How can we have that? So obviously we know there's a problem. But if I'm going to fix a problem, I need to know more than that. So this basically, now when we diagnose a campus, we need to know 2 things. Everybody knows achievement, right? Everybody's used to pass rate on tax, Commended rates. The most important thing to know is how fast are the kids moving. So you need a growth. So this basically integrates growth and achievement. So in this case, achievement, high achievements on the left, low achievements on the right. High growth is on the bottom. Low growth is on the top, because I have to deal with both. Those are the 2 basic measures of performance in academics. Everybody knows achievement. Pretty much nobody agrees on a standard for growth. So why growth is, if anything, way more important than achievement. I can't explain why it's not, but nonetheless, we certainly have the ability, and we would encourage you to as well, because now I can see real quickly these are 4 subjects and grades in 2 different elementaries, and I can see on the left, that's the one that's not doing so well. Low achieving kids, because all the dots are on the right. Overall, I'm growing a little bit faster than the pack, which is why that red dot, which is the sum dot, is below the middle line. The one on the right, it's a very high flying, very high achieving. It's the one with 96% pass rate. But guess what? I've got 2 subjects in grade, 4th grade English and 5th grade math, that are 4th quartile. That is, even though I'm on exemplary campus, even though my scores are high, my high-flying kids aren't growing as fast as they should. So what looks great on the outside, as we drill down into detail, now I have very specific questions that I'm going to talk to that principal about when I have my monthly meeting. What's happening in 4th grade English? What's happening in 4th grade math? What's the plan? How are you going to make that better? So the data reveals that, and then even further, I can go down to the teacher level. This is the same matrix. Once again, if I'm growing fast, it's on the bottom. If I'm growing slow, it's on the top. High achieving students on the left, low achieving students on the right. The red dots are the teachers on my campus. The hollow dots are all the teachers in the district. So now I know who's in my campus and how they're doing versus everybody else in the district. Because as I was saying before this thing started, if you're going to improve in public education, the first thing you have to deal with is the yes buts. well, we're not real happy with your scores. Yes, but, you know, my kids just weren't prepared when they came to class. And it was the third grade teacher that did it. And, you know, I have, you know, too many of this. And as long as that exists, you're digging a hole. Yes buts dig a hole from which you can't recover. If you can't handle the yes buts, you're never going to get where you want to be. So this is, you know, these two on the right, for example, well, we're not growing, but the kids weren't. Well, then why are that we have teachers in the same district with the same kids as you do that are achieving that? Those are your mentors. Go find them and ask them what they're doing. So that basic. So now I have some idea. There's 4 teachers, 2 doing a little better than expected, 2 doing a little worse, and then. But that said, I can also look at how they're moving, and just to make a long story short, 2 of those 4 teachers were also in my campus last year, but they were growing their kids faster the year before than they did this year. So if you see those 2 teachers that are in the blue here, they are actually doing worse in terms of growth than they were before. And this is completely invisible in an achievement-based system. You cannot see this occurring. So what happened is I got 2 new teachers, and my 2 teachers that were doing pretty well got worse, and my 2 new teachers didn't do very well either. That is a diagnosis. Now, the principal can do something about that. The principal can't do something about that if they don't know that in the first place. So, you know, if you want your campuses to do well, you have to give them the tools to let them do well. So, end of story. So I know I covered a lot of ground, and I might have talked more about academics than you were expecting, but once again, that's all that matters. So whatever decision you're making on the budget side has to, at the end of the day, be related to what is it doing to our academics, which means we have to understand what's happening in the academic side. There isn't a finance side and an academic side. You have to integrate the two. All decisions are related, and all decisions are integrated. And that's really, really the bottom line.
Susan?
Oh, is this the time for questions?
Yeah, I want to ask you a general question. We talked about this, that the previous person who held this spot did, and you came close to it with saying that we've got 100 million. This is your data from 2009 and 10, but he came up with however you want to describe it, our total compensation is over per year by 110 million. And so that's generally what you had said. If you flip the page, I'm in the progress of trying to replicate that, but I didn't have all the data. But you can see that we shifted in the categories of, and we have a new peer group, but we went from teachers having a variance of 7.9% to being 5.2%, but of course that's where you've got the most number of people. But as you had mentioned, we still have a large variance on aides. But anyway, I won't go through each one. We don't yet know, but we'll know soon how that calculates out. If it's, I'm going to guess that it's still in the 100 million range. But the question is, we have a raise on the table that's been generally proposed in the budget, and it's 3% for teachers related instructional trips. Is that a term you're familiar with? And then also we have proposed in the budget adding $600 per employee for healthcare premium. So it's an overall cost to the district of about 28 or 29 million. And the only calculation I've done thus far is that shifts the variance for teachers up to 9.6% to our new set of peers. And so, what do you think?
You want to take that one?
It's relative to what everybody else is doing. Most people have been in a salary freeze kind of a situation for a while now. And sooner or later needs to be some relief, and we know more money is coming in the next biennium in terms of additional funding. But at the same time, you have to say, how do I harvest those opportunities out there so I can internally fund those increases? Rather than being additive, can I take some action and internally fund those increases that I want to do? Because we know we haven't hit the wall in structural deficits in a lot of other programs in the state. And you start looking at projections for pensions and health care, it's going to swamp the state budget in 3 to 5 years from now. So we may see an up right now, but the general consensus is competition for resources 3 to 5 years down the road are going to be extremely tight. And that's not just Texas. Every state that we work with, SREB, which is Southern Region Educational Board, who covers the 16 southern states, and they say we're experiencing this problem in all the states. In fact, Texas is probably lagging in terms of when they're going to see the effects of that hit them.
But back to your original comment with 100 million variance, whether there's a raise or not, if the end result is still 100 million variance, and that's going to hinder us to get to 1-1.
All right, here's the other axiom. One of them is the academic outcomes are insensitive to staff ratios or years of experience. The other one is work the long axis. So at the end of in costs, no cost changes are going to come instantaneously. They're hard. They affect people. It has to be done cautiously, but you need to. I would say the academic expectations have to rise. So whatever you do with the cost side, what are you going to ask for that? If you in fact say, I will give this, what are you asking back? What academic improvements over and above what you're already seeing are you going to get in exchange? You're making an investment. If you make an investment with your personal money, do you expect a return? So if you're going to make an investment with Dallas funds, Dallas ISD funds, you should expect a return too. You have to put that expectation out front. So, and I agree with Tim. I mean, in the real world, yes, you want incentives, but there are ways internally to generate those funds, and I want something for it. Yeah, I can measure exactly how much it costs me. Can you measure exactly what it's buying you?
Well, and then we've talked about it before at this table, but we've made sacrifices in other programs.
Yeah, I mean, sacrifices, this is, you hit a hot spot because program evaluation is talked about but rarely done. And just like we can evaluate teacher effectiveness, we can evaluate program effectiveness as well. So, I mean, a sacrifice means it's a really kick-butt program that's doing a lot of good and we can't do it. But is that the case? Or, in fact, if you had a lot of those, you wouldn't be third quartile. So in fact, you probably have to look hard at some programs and say, should we be spending the money for these programs? Because if it were really effective, academically, you wouldn't be where you are. I mean, once again, once you've adjusted for demographics, there's no yes but for Dallas ISD either. You can be first quartile. You can be number one.
Susan, you had a question?
Yeah, there's no accounting for things like teacher planning time or that kind of stuff in your staff to student teacher ratio kind of paradigm at all. I understand.
Yeah, performance relative to your peers means that everybody faces basically the same constraints. If anything, large districts have a little bit of an advantage. If I'm a tiny district, believe me, class size is a problem. Because I just have so many ways I can slice and dice and get enough kids into the class, which is why big districts tend to be more efficient in their staffing, which is where it is.
And so. I was also wondering, so is this data available to us on a school-by-school basis in DISD? Do we have is this plugged in somewhere and it's on the?
Well, you and I need the passcode. He's got it, right?
Yeah, it's in the budgeting app. It's in the new update
So it's not on the My Data portal there.
The average question you asked about if the goal of the journey is to get to 1-1, you're already inside the boundaries of the financial first quartile. So, we know everybody's going to go up. Is that going to be enough to throw you back into the second quartile? Hard to say at this point in time because the budgets aren't passed and everything else. We're still waiting for the legislative session in, which is, as Paul says, you're already there financially. You're in the, if the academics were first quartile, you'd be in the 1-1 box because finance is there already. Judging how much can I do, I spent 10 years in turnaround, and everything I did I had to fund internally because no bank was going to lend me any money or anything else. So I had to have rigorous program evaluations. In the private sector, it was expressed a little bit differently. But if I wanted to do this, go find money inside the company to do it. Have we pushed the envelope all the way? Well, if there's a $100 million difference between your staffing model in Houston, I would say there's probably room to push it a little bit further.
Let me add one thing. I didn't point out during if you go to page 7 of our presentation, that in the matrix, reflecting cost is your 2012, which is the most current data, but we have 2013 staffing data, which is your early warning indicator of cost. So if you look at what you've done in 2013 in staffing, it gives you a good idea. Are you going to get better or worse in finance? You made a huge jump versus the pack in 2013. So you went from 118th to 92nd. So you got more efficient, but you got a lot more efficient than the pack did. So what that tells me, 113, that year's almost over now. I mean, it's, you know, we're up to June almost, so it's pretty much done in the can. We won't see the numbers for another year. But what I'm saying is, however good you were, you're probably going to be actually a lot better at the conclusion of this year. If we come back in a year and show you where your dot is, it's going to be left. So, you know, I'm not sure how much hand-wringing I would do. What I would say is I would take a little bit of credit for the decisions that have been made over the last couple of years to get you where you are. I think it's been very solidly managed. And, you know, once again, whatever decision, I would say, does it help me academically?
Do you have recommendations regarding program evaluation? Have we really talked about how we evaluate programs in DISD?
Or when we were talking before you came in, do you have any broad comments about how you were telling me which districts moved how many places, and do you have any strategies? It
is absolutely all over there's no, just like who's in the 1-1 box, there's, you know, Socorro is in there, Angleton's in there, Garland's now in there, Carrollton Farmers Branch is in there, Conroe was in there, and I think they fell out, right? Conroe was in there for about 4 years. They've fallen out.
But the message is find where your dot's off and find out who's got the best practice in that program or that.
What the best message really comes from our number one. This is from Tim. I'm stealing his thunder, but our number one district 5 years in a row has been Hershey-Lewis, Bedford. Gene Buinger, who we're meeting with tomorrow, is retiring. Okay, so I mean he's retiring at the top of his game. He actually got to number 2 academically, but he's number 1 overall and has been. But we present to this board every year. Okay, and the good news is, congratulations, you're number 1 again. And it's hard to be number 1 because everybody is shooting at you. Of the 5 components in academics that I told you about, and there's 4 in finance, they're not in the top 20 in any of them. So does he have a problem goal setting? Not at all, because nobody manages a district. You have to manage your components. So is my transportation department number 1? Is my food services number 1? Is my elementary schools number? So see what I'm saying? So yes, you're right. In performance by your peers, be real careful how you select your peers. But no, there won't be any problem in setting targets or finding high performers.
Are there any measurements beyond high school as far as the HEB area?
You mean what happens when the kids get out?
What happens with the kids?
No, there are none. This is the famed, you know, K20 or K, you know, P16 or P20.
So they could be number 1 and below average in sending kids to Texas A&M.
Yeah, but you could look at their remediation rates. It should be somewhere better.
Well, and he said the standard was 4-year graduation. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's 4-year graduation.
No, I was talking
From
about
high school.
remediation rates. You can look at, if you look at HEB remediation rates, if they're really doing well, their remediation rates should be low. And the other thing would be, there's also data now for any of the kids that go to Texas schools. You can see how many of them successfully completed their first year.
Yeah.
And so that would be the data you'd want to look at for HEB on how their graduating students do.
But I'll give you an anecdote.
That data is out there.
What Gene did is Gene decided to give I don't know, PSAT or something to the 9th graders, just buy it for them all. And then he finally recognized, he said, you know, in my district, almost none of these kids have ever seen a college. So he arranged a visit to SMU. 'Cause how can you achieve a goal if you have no sight picture in your head? What's college mean? You know, maybe to a lot of us, we knew about, you know, our sisters went or uncles went or something like that. You've never seen a college. Why is it a goal? Until I see, so I mean, what I'm saying, that's how he thinks. So I mean, there's ways. So I, you know, it's. I suspect he would.
When I was in Austin, you probably seen these numbers. They can track how many UT Austin. They can track where the kids are coming from. And I don't recall HEB schools being on there. Maybe I'll look at them again.
Yeah, it would be worth. It would be
a lot of kids at UT, and I don't remember that being.
I will say that because I actually presented it at TASB.
The UT's the measurement, but I'm.
Yeah, no, it's the right question. The data should exist. If I make a car, do I want to know that 3 years later the brakes failed or the steering failed? Yeah. Do you know what happened to your? You know, absent data on the outcomes, how do you fix anything?
And how big is HEB?
That might be a yes, but.
No, I'm just 20,000. So if they graduate, you know, 1,000 kids a year, and only 7% of them.
Well, there are multiple high schools.
Right, but
Dan, do you have any questions?
no, you wouldn't expect to see two.
Thank you very much.
There's small high schools that
Pardon me?
just feed.
Very
7 or 8% of them can get in.
I think this is a podcast I'm gonna have to watch again. Yes, you were.
We're not sharing.
Even so, if it's 10,
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to go
students, there's no
viral.
more than 1,000 grads. If you take, 10% of them, it's 120. Out of 50,000 students at UT, would you meet the 120 or more than one or two?
Oh, it was what?
Yeah.
For the presentations, but then.
But yeah, I mean, I still want to know how we evaluate.
So.
Louisa, oh, good, sorry.
That's me.
Let's maybe put on some for future time how we really do.
Wait, here it is. Here it is.
It's our process. How do we?
For all of you who don't know, our budget analyst here is Squetta Marks, and she's our expert on running the ERG. So she's going to present to you kind of a financial, budget view of how we're looking at ERG compared to last year. I showed you a Chase group. The Chase group's changed a little bit, as Paul had talked about. You know, it's a ranking system, so there's always some movement. So.
35 in your. Hey, good evening. As Jim said, my name is Squetta Marks. I am a budget analyst with Budget Services. I won't be before you long because I know it's getting late in the evening. So just a quick overview of how Dallas, or how we look at ERG information. We rank Dallas within the top 100 largest districts. And as you can see here on this slide, we spend in the highest and amongst all the categories with the exception of transportation and extracurricular. We fare pretty well in staff development and community services, so that if we want to spend more money there, we probably want to drill down and see what it is we're actually spending our funds on. For 2012, we have picked these 10 districts as our peer group. As you see, Houston is in the 1-1 box this year for 2012. Also, we have Harlandale and Conroe, who is in the 2-1 box, not necessarily the 1-1 box. They're doing better than we are academically, so we know we may not jump to 1-1 overnight. So if we want to move maybe just to the next level and do an incremental success story there, we might want to look at those that are doing well in the 2-1 box. This is how Dallas has fared in the ERG matrix over the past few years since 2003. Well, I've highlighted 2012 to show you where we are, and this is just kind of how we fared financially and academically. As you see, we do tend to stay right in the third quartile academically, but we have moved back and forth between the first and second quartile financially. And just for fun, I did do Houston. Their matrix, they tend to stay around the 2-1 area, but as you see for 2012, they have moved into the first quartile financially and the first quartile academically. Just some quick statistics here for the top 10 districts or the Chase group that we've done, and we have, you know, some high-low enrollment. You have Del Val, sorry, enrollment at 11,000 with the lowest, and Houston at the highest for 201 students.
Excuse me. I did it for my own sake. I don't know if anyone else needs it. DeVal is Austin. Galena Park, I knew, was Houston. Harlandale is San Antonio. It's on one of the handouts I provided. But basically, these are not rural school districts.
Now, with the general fund expenditure per student, we did an weighted average amongst our Chase group, and as you can see in instruction, we spend about $271 more per student than our Chase group. In transportation, we spend $77 less than our Chase group.
And it was explained to me in 2011 when we talked about transportation. Our school construction is bringing schools closer to kids, and that's because of our bond campaign and attendance zone. Over time, we're putting the schools closer to the kids.
And just some salary and staffing benchmarking that we looked at against our Chase group. This is how we fare in the different categories. We have breaking it out between teachers, aides, principals, assistant principals, and the like. As you can see, we're very high in the aides category, where we spend $6,000, almost $7,000 more than our Chase group. Other support staff and auxiliary staff, we're very high in those categories as well.
Do you know why?
This is where we would have to drill down. We just do this analysis to see where we are or why we're spending so much in those areas, and we would have to drill down just a little, farther to see what the case may be.
Well, you got to remember that 85% of this is salaries, so it's basically salaries.
But our analysis shows, or their analysis shows, that on the first category of aides that we're 35% over market in what we pay them. But I guess the question I have is, what is their function? Are they kindergarten? Are they pre-K aides? Are they special ed aides? And that's
where we would have to drill down to see where it is that we're paying the highest, because it could be some anomalies in those numbers that we would have to drill down just a little farther just to see. And this is just the raw data of those numbers and the different categories for average salaries. Now, the student to staff ratio in the categories, teachers and aides, again, we look at how much we're spending per FTE in those categories and the amount of students that those schools or those categories take care of. So if you look at the average salary for librarians, we spend about $3,200 more than our Chase group, but we look at almost 600 kids less than their Chase group. And again, we would need to drill down just to see what it is that's...
So we have a higher span of control with our librarians.
Lower span of control.
So
Sorry.
a librarian, we spend 35 more hundreds, whatever, per librarian, but...
That's right. I'm mixing things up. Sorry.
They handle almost 600 less. I became Italian.
Right. So we have fewer librarians for a higher cost. Is that correct?
No, we pay our librarians more to look at less students or to see after less.
So it's a double beneficent. Thank you. Okay.
Same thing. The same thing with counselors as well. Counselors, we spend about $2,000 more, $2,300 more with looking at or watching counseling. 416 less students than our peer group.
Study.
And this is just just the student to staff ratio, the raw data here. You guys can take a look at average cost per student. It's costing us $547 more to pay our teachers than we do that our peer groups, but their student to staff ratio is about 2 students, so that's a pretty good. As far as the student to staff ratio, we would again need to drill down to see what is really happening there as to why we're paying more for those students, because we need to look at what our finances were doing at that time. Okay?
Okay.
Just the
Back up 1 second.
okay.
I'm looking at this slide, and I think that I've just missed
I asked for black and white, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I think I've just missed a critical piece. This, I've got, this is slide 46. It says teachers were paying $547 more per student.
It's costing us $500.
So
Costing, not necessarily paying. Our average that we're paying our teachers is $2,600 more. So we pay on average $2,600 more than case group.
And then we have something else that says instruction on slide 40 is $271 more per student.
One's the
It's just the
actual-
average dollars spent. It's dollars spent on instruction, not necessarily teachers.
Isn't this average cost and dollars spent? Isn't that essentially the
See,
same?
one is broken down in just the instructional area, and then the other is broken out by position, like teachers and aides. And
This is okay. This is by position, this is by,
Who's
Function.
giving
40
instruction?
is,
Isn't that
right.
teachers?
so her question is, what's the difference between instruction and a teacher? What's the,
well, instruction could include just all of those things that fall under function 11, so that will roll up to function 11, correct? That will roll up to function 11. So you may have related
so
instruction.
it's expenditures but not salary in 271?
Not necessarily, right?
All right. Thank you.
Okay, the average cost per student. This is just the raw data as far as the different districts that we're looking at. And that will be the end of mine. Are there any questions or any other questions?
Are you able to put any what-ifs in your model, like to project this year's budget?
No, not for ERG, no.
Dan?
I have a question on slide 40. Related to transportation. You indicated that we pay a whole lot less for transportation than our case group. Is that because we have a policy of only busing in if you're outside the 2-mile radius, whereas some districts may be busing
All of their
at 1.5 or something?
I think, Mike, that the real reason for that is because Dallas County does our busing. So what we do is, does anybody have an orange? In any case, that's God probably. In any case, what happens is the contract that we have with Dallas County is much lower than people who, and most districts have their own bus company handled, within the district. And what keeps part of that cost low for us is that Dallas County has the authority to do a tax. So they go out and I think they tax now at a penny, which is their maximum. So in a certain sense, there's a kind of an extra penny that gets brought in to the Dallas County that doesn't really get attributed to us, and so that lowers our cost, and that is why we're so much lower. And I think in terms of that 2 miles, that 2 mile limit is by legislation that says you've got to bus outside unless it's a hazardous route. And I know that all large districts deal with parents. All parents want all their kids bused all the time, so that's an issue.
And if we,
the legislation says that
Right.
if the child is more than 2 miles from the school, you have to give them a ride, but it doesn't say that the district can't bus kids who are 1.5 miles outside the
I think that the 2 reasons we're lower is, one is because it's an outside outsourced with its own, and second with its own tax rate.
Maybe to better understand transportation would be, can you all do a what-if that includes Garland, Richardson, and all the vendors of Dallas County?
Yeah, we could do that. Sure. Supervisor would be more than happy to do that.
Say it again.
That's a good answer.
We're going to look at the Dallas County School District's transportation.
I mean, is that something you'd like to see, Dan?
Well, yeah. What I'm getting at is, if it turns out that a large part of the explanation for our relatively lower costs for transportation is that we're about as conservative as possible in terms of providing buses, and other districts are busing inside a mile, and they're getting better attendance, and their transportation costs are higher. We might want to change the radius from 2 miles to 1.5 miles or something.
Well, Dan, most districts don't within the 2 miles unless there's something called hazardous condition areas.
I understand that, and that's
He's just putting a what-if out there, I think.
Is that are any of these districts here busing inside the 2 mile radius, other than for hazardous districts? For hazardous.
Are some of other districts' costs higher because of the NCLB transportation costs? I don't think our costs for that are very high. It doesn't seem like we have a lot of students that are bused for NCLB, but I wonder if in other districts...
It's a high per cost, but it's a low subscription. But I think what I was trying to get at was...
They have a higher number of students that they're having to bus for NCLB, and that would raise their transportation costs probably considerably. We don't have that issue.
But I think Jim's main point was that it's not a relative comparison to the 200 schools because we have this subsidy, so to speak. Right. The taxpayers paying probably the same amount, but we're not seeing the true cost because it's over here in Dallas County. But if we looked at and analyzed it by the others in the peers who subscribe to Dallas County, we'd get more meaningful information. So, thank you.
Has Dallas ISD continually had less or fewer dollars in staff development than they had previous years?
That was one of the areas I would have to go back and look at previous analysis that we've done, but we've been pretty stagnant there in staff development.
Staff development for school leadership, which would be principals and assistant principals.
Well, you're talking about staff development as far in terms of this.
Well, you have two here. You have school leadership, and then you have staff development.
Okay, staff development is just for that function 13 that we use.
13.
That
okay.
we train the teachers and the librarians.
For function 11?
Yeah, for those that are in that function 11, function 12, that's what that staff development is for.
Okay.
School leadership pertains to the principals and assistant principal category that we spend in function 23, the administrators of the campus. So we spend less in school leadership compared to the other districts.
As you mentioned before, you said you hadn't really looked into the whys, but I was just wondering if the SILT team was part of the staff development cost.
Yes.
Okay.
Those payments and those extra duty payments and stipends are part of that cost. Yes, ma'am.
All stipends go in there other than athletics or fine arts?
No, I wouldn't say in function 13 staff development. No, the SILT. The SILT
only.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sequetta.
Thank you.
Come on, Jim. Leave the gun, bring the cannoli. Let's go.
Welcome.
Thank you. Now, Jim, okay?
Oh, I we're happy to.
No, that's all right.
Can't speak, all right?
get sedimentary in a
Well, this is the, thank you for having me tonight. The presentation you're going to see is the same presentation that was presented to the Board of Trustees on April 11th. There's been some slight movement in some of the numbers between 11th and today, but for the sake of consistency, we'll show you the same presentation. The numbers have not changed that much. As the slide says, all three budgets to be adopted, which are the general fund, food service, and debt service, are still in development. Food service and debt service are substantially complete up to this point. It's always the general fund, the bigger fund, that has a lot of work being done on it up until into May and June. The revenue side is probably going to change. You heard a gentleman mention that some additional revenues will probably flow to the district because of legislation that's still being proposed in Austin. So far, that legislation is only representing somewhere between $3 to $5 to $6 million for us in the first year of the biennium. So it's not much in relation to over $1 billion budget, but it is something. Cover the revenues first. Current estimates for general fund revenue by percent are in line with what the district has seen in the past. Despite all the talk about what the state is going to do with their revenue model, the DISD only receives about 1/3 of the money from the state, with the rest of the money coming in primarily from local taxes and other kind of local revenue, which is indicative of a district that is a Chapter 21 district, and just a very small amount of federal revenue, although the largest portion of that federal revenue is now represented by the Build America Bond subsidy, which we are now recording in the general fund. Just a quick overview of our local revenue estimate. The largest portion of that are taxes, with a whole host of other kinds of local taxes that we are recognizing for a grand total of about $789 million. Just a quick overview of exactly how we come up with that local tax amount. The assumption right now is that our taxable values are going to increase by approximately 2% for next year. Early indications from DCAD suggest that 2% is a pretty good number for us to use, a very conservative number. Our tax rate on the M&O side will remain exactly where it is because we're at the maximum rate for our tax rate. Bringing in approximately $784 million, only being reduced by what's called the frozen loss, for a total estimated tax revenue of $765 million. The 30% is represented by primarily the Foundation School Program, the Available School Fund, for a total state aid of about $355 million. Again, this state aid is currently based on current law. There is no new law for us to project what our revenues are going to be next year. So what does everybody do? You base it on current law. There's this thing called the template that we all use in the state. We drop our numbers in, and out it spits what the estimate is for your state revenue based on a whole host of different things we put in: ADA, FTEs, taxable values, CPTD values from the comptroller, so on and so forth. The district is still what's called an ASETAR district. The district is still receiving additional state aid for tax reduction. Right now that amount is projected to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $31 million. That amount is going down, but of course as it goes down, the offset is an increase in local collections that we're going to project to be receiving, so it acts as a counterweight to any local revenue that we are going to be bringing in. So on the one hand, we put money in our right-hand pocket, and the state takes it away in our left-hand pocket by reducing our ASETAR.
Kind of like alternative minimum tax and some
in essence. And as it points out, ASETAR is still a mechanism by which we do not receive the full benefit of increases in local taxes, simply because the state offsets it with a decrease in the ASETAR revenue stream. The general fund revenue on the federal side is normally, in this case it's 3%, and in other years it's actually less than that. But last year the Board of Trustees made a decision to recognize the BAB subsidy in the general fund, which is being reduced by sequestration by approximately 8.7%. So while we had thought we were going to receive about $20.3 million, latest estimates are about 18.5. And the rest of the federal revenue is primarily in direct cost, some SHARs, Medicaid, various other types of federal revenue.
How many years will we have the BAB subsidy?
Oh, many more years, and a lot of us are going to be around here, I imagine.
Oh, okay.
I think it goes for
20 years,
20
I
years,
think,
yeah.
Right.
approximately.
Right.
Now, it does reduce, I think, in about 10 years, I think it reduces a little bit.
It's fairly constant for about the next 10 years. The sequestration, if that is pulled back, then we will start to see the 20 plus $1 million. But if right now, I guess for the next few years, we'll plan on about the 18.5. Food service fund, again, food service and debt service are primarily complete. Just to give you kind of the same analysis of the general fund, but from food service, most of the money is coming from the feds because most of our kids are free and reduced. And we get reimbursement on every breakfast and lunch that we get.
Any savings achieved in that department is reinvested in that department in the way of equipment and cafeteria upgrades? Is that?
That's correct. In fact, I think our food service fund is at a point now, if I recall, Jim, that they're almost beyond 3 months worth of operating expenses. They have a
I
fund
believe
balance.
their fund balance is about 10 million, so.
So you cannot have more than that, so they can actually use that to reinvest into the food service program.
That there would still be an incentive for them to continue to save money, which means they could do even more cafeteria upgrades.
That's right.
And because in a follow-up question back in October, I learned that there are some peer districts who have lower, Houston for one, I have the data, but have lower salary or hourly rates, significantly lower.
Is Houston's outsourced, though?
Yes, they're Aramark.
That's another thing to take into consideration when you're trying to compare peer districts. Debt service, again, most of the revenue for the debt service fund is coming from local taxes. This district does not receive any kind of state assistance simply because we're Chapter 21. There are 2 programs, EDA and IFA, if they both still exist after this legislative session, that do offer assistance to school districts that cannot generate enough, I believe it's $35 per WADA per penny to help pay back their debt. And the other side of the budget coin, of course, is the expenditures. We covered the revenues, and now what are all those revenues going to pay for? Estimated general fund expenditures right now, we're at about 82% salaries and benefits, 18% for all other. That's in line with what we've seen over the past couple of years. The gentleman who presented earlier was right on target by saying if you're going to receive any kind of cost reduction, a lot of it is going to come from salaries and benefits. That's where you spend 82% of your money, 82% of your time or more should be spent on analyzing your costs in relation to other peer districts, for instance, and making sure that you're not out of line with your salaries or, of course, FTEs. The general fund expenditures by function, a typical kind of analysis that is looked at simply to make sure that the largest area there is instruction. And some other data there off to the side, going back to the latest data that is on TEA's website for state averages by function. For instance, state average for 10-11 was 58.1%, and the amounts in parentheses represent the current proposed budget. As you can tell, for some of the main functions, 11, 21, 23, and 41, the district is certainly in line with state averages.
Forgive me, because I don't know why I would have written it down on this page, but is there any financial impact on the NCLB waiver that Michael Williams pursued? Is it only related to the SES tutoring program, or?
I don't know if it has an impact on the SES.
It would relieve us of having to offer SES.
But from within the general fund, no. No, outside of the general fund, certainly, but within the general fund.
No, I'm sorry. I apologize. It's just that's where I wrote down my question. Is there any dramatic change financially as a result of that? The waiver.
On the federal side, Mr. Roberts will cover that during his presentation.
All right.
The general fund expenditures, looking at FTEs, spending a lot of time looking at what are we doing with positions in the district. Comparing the planned FTEs in 13-14 to the FTEs that were in the adopted 12-13 budget, you can go down and see that there has been an increase from 16,150 to 16,406. The primary driver of that increase is because of the staffing ratio changes that were made. So we're increasing aides speaking of aides, and also increasing teacher units.
Is the aides, would you speculate because of the expansion of pre-K?
There's, I believe, Gilbert probably has that number.
At least in part.
34 teachers in pre-K. The strategic feeder pattern, or now the newly named Imagine 2020. Those additional FTEs are also reflected in the first column or second column. The proposed new expenditures in the general fund, you mentioned the raise, the 3.2 raise, approximately $21.3 million right now. Increase in the health insurance contribution, estimated to be about $7.4 million. And when it comes to the education-related increases in expenditures, Imagine 2020, which used to be called the strategic feeder pattern, is about $8.8 million, all the way down to paying for the ACT, SAT, TSI, and AP test, projected to be about $1.2 million. That represents the bulk of the increased expenditures for next year. Some decreases in general fund expenditures based on some work that has been done by the budget department. Well, certainly the one-time payment to employees that happened during this fiscal year, I believe that was in the October-November timeframe, is not going to happen in the 13-14 school year, so we can certainly recognize that as a decrease in expenditures. Somebody mentioned SILT earlier. The superintendent has recommended the elimination of that particular stipend. There's a reduced amount that we're going to spend for the School Leadership Academy. That amount is projected to be $4 million next year. It was $5 million for this year, so we're recognizing about $1 million in savings. And then the various other utility cost reductions, any computer lease, so on and so forth. There will be no TIF payment. This year, the city of Dallas notified us that we had met our obligations for the TIFs that we had. So Darlene Williams informed me that $3.4 million, which was originally included in the 13-14 budget for us to receive the taxes for these TIFs and then remit them to the city of Dallas, we don't have to do. So we've met that obligation.
Am I the only one who doesn't know what a TIF is?
Tax increment fund. It's similar to a tax. Well, I guess it's a tax increment zone where, in exchange for this reduction in taxes, there is going to be economic development, which at the end of this particular time period, it means that you actually have a higher tax base on which to tax.
Ask a question about the.
I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
I wanted to know, would like to know, what's the rationale behind eliminating the SILT?
I don't have that. It was just one of the items that was presented to the budget department via myself and the superintendent to eliminate them. I believe it has something to do with the strategic feeder pattern and how that particular structure is being built, and how the SILT stipend would now go away because there was going to be another methodology by which they were going to get the same thing but didn't have to pay for it now.
Way of supporting the schools,
right?
Instructionally.
Exactly. Well, exactly. Yeah, especially with the Imagine 2020. I don't have all the details, but I believe that was discussion.
So, so does that follow up on that? So does that mean that my understanding was kind of that we might still have SILT, there just wouldn't be a stipend at like a campus that's not one of the strategic ones?
Whether or not it will be called SILT, I'm not sure, but the
whatever program is going in on those 3 campuses at a high school level, say, is going to also happen at the rest of the 20 high schools.
I believe so.
They are in all schools, aren't they? The SILT team?
SILT.
Right, yeah, I was just an example.
Okay.
Stipend's going away.
And it's $1,000 per person, isn't it? Just $1,000 per person?
I believe, is that what it was?
Yeah,
1,000. Yeah.
And if that's the case, they report to work earlier than other teachers.
Yeah,
and many of them
details-
have a base pay of $200 a day. That's not.
That detail, unless Gilbert knows, the detail on it would be Sylvia Reyna's in terms of how they're moving the money out of SILT, and they're restructuring the administration within the campuses.
They still will get that support of a teacher mentor and the leadership of teachers within the building.
That may be
improvement plans.
Maybe a question that you want to address to Sylvia Reyna. Now, I will pass that on in an email that you'll want to understand the issue itself.
I had a quick question about the School Leadership Academy. It's going down by 20%, basically. Does that mean you're taking 20% fewer persons or the
Don't have the
scope of
details
it?
on
Okay.
exactly how they're restructuring that particular program. If it is driven by the number of participants, then yes, you would logically say the number of participants is probably going to go down as well, since we're going to be spending approximately $1 million less next year.
Yeah, that's my understanding, and also I think that we probably overfunded that. Our expectations were a little bit higher this current year in terms of what it was going to cost us. So that cost is actually quite a bit less. So we will save the money there.
Does the state provide grant funding for school leadership people, like a leadership person for math, science, technology, reading?
Knowledge, no.
It might be a federal question.
I do know that Duncanville utilizes grant funding for supplying the leadership of teachers on the campuses. I guess basically, can we go somewhere else to get the money if we are actually eliminating or reducing School Leadership Academy and also eliminating the SILT stipends? Can we go to
I think that
another
the
source?
directions of the superintendent is that, he wants to move towards performance-based pay. And so I think that, that's kind of what he's looking at, is that, they're developing an evaluation system, and they're looking at, they want to raise the academic standards of this district, which is his number one priority. And so I think in order to do that, he feels that, we need to look at a way to look at performance-based pay. And so I think he's, making kind of a slow progress in that direction. And I think that's what's happening. So.
Well, I know the districts can apply to the commissioner for these grants, the master teacher grant programs and et cetera. I'm just wondering if DISD has looked into that funding source.
We used to have the master teacher grant, and I think we were no longer offered it. I think 2010 or 2011.
You can't just apply for it, or you,
Well,
if you
yeah,
applied
yeah,
for it,
we
you were
eligible and received it.
you were
It was
not
an
eligible
application.
for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the grants are going away simply
Mostly, yeah,
because
cut.
2 years ago, a lot of the grants went away simply because they were no longer being funded.
It's part of the funding across the state.
They were receiving it as of this school year, so.
Well, they may have been continued with those people who are already in the program. Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering if we had looked at other resources or other sources to
I think it
fund.
behooves any district to, if there are grants out there which we are eligible, that within our grant department, we certainly would be applying as long as the strings that were attached weren't too onerous for us. So, yes, if there's an opportunity for us to receive money from the state or the federal government, for that matter, that is something that we can use, I don't think any district would not apply for those kind of funds.
Want me to give you the education code number so you can look it up?
Well, the education code could have a particular reference, but there may be no money to fund it.
I know. Well, I'm just trying to grab at anything that we can in order to keep.
I think we have a robust enough grants department to make sure that we are either, again, through TEA, simply saying that, as Mr. Roberts pointed out, they simply say, here's your money, you're eligible, versus those that you have to actually apply for and they're competitive.
Do we have a person in our grants department actually writing and securing funds for the district, other than having principals to, submit grants? But do we have a person in a grant department in DISD to do that?
No, we primarily identify grants and then work with program managers or campuses to secure them.
So you don't
Once
have
they identify
someone.
a need that they want. For
So they
instance,
have to identify a need.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, but, all right. But back, I guess we do not have someone in a department to actually
Competitive
write
grant
grants
writer, I'm not
for
aware
the
of.
funds that we need in order to maintain the type of staffing that we need on the campuses. Okay.
Clarification, so the School Leadership Academy, that's the Principals Academy.
Yes, well, they call it the
Fellows.
Yeah,
or-
fellows.
Okay. And then
School Leadership Fellows Academies.
And then what I heard was the stipends going away because the process of what SILT did is changing.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. I'm curious, did Garland have a SILT and a stipend?
Oh, that is I believe stands for Campus Instructional Leadership Team. Every district has something similar. We just all call it something different. It's very difficult when you're trying to compare because it may be exactly the same thing that another district is doing. They just call it something different.
They may or may not have provided a stipend.
Some would either not provide a stipend or they simply bill 2 days into your contract. So you go from 187 to 189. There's 1,000 different ways to do it, unfortunately.
I know you are only reporting the budget, but are the principals aware of how the SILT team will be replaced?
Again, it's a Sylvia Reyna question.
Okay. Next.
Continuing now into food service expenditures, again following a roughly same pattern that we've seen not only in this district and many other districts, with salaries and benefits not being the majority simply because of food costs and other kinds of things within food service. Debt service expenditures, we're repaying many years of previous debt to the tune of about $192.8 million in 13-14. To do a few budget comparisons to 12-13, what we're looking at is the M&O rate for 13-14 is going to be pretty much identical to the rate in 12-13. Right now, the estimated 13-14 INS rate is projected to be a bit lower than the current rate simply because we have higher values on which to tax to bring in the necessary dollars to pay back our debt. Again, taxable values, as I mentioned, are projected to be a very conservative 2% increase over next year. We'll make changes to those as we get better information from DCAD. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to, if Jose were here, I think Jose would bring up homestead exemptions. That's something and that Dallas has a more generous homestead exemption than many of our peers.
That's correct.
And reducing it by 2% or changing it by 2% would generate $4 million. And changing it by 10%, which would match our peers, would generate $20 million. Does that sound about right? Or
what I've been told is the elimination of it altogether would generate about $20 million, which would not be subject to recapture. So we would actually receive the full benefit of the increases in local taxes.
I was just going to throw it out there. You know, we could do it in stages.
Well, that's certainly something for the board to consider. That was not part of the
assumptions
or the orders that were given to us as we started to build the budget to factor in a decrease in a decrease or a complete elimination of the homestead exemption, the optional homestead exemption.
So,
Question on the debt service.
The page here, it said tax rates, taxable values, and staffing ratios. I don't see anything on staffing ratios.
We've already covered that in a previous slide. Does somebody else have a question?
I do.
Oh, yes.
On the debt service expenditures, the principal is $60 million. Is this all of the debt that DISD is looking at?
Well, this represents how our debt structure has been set up for the multitude of different bond issues we've had over the past X number of years. And as we develop our debt program, this may represent some refunded bonds that may be included in there because we have. How much is it, Jim, that we have outstanding right now?
About 4.5 billion, I believe.
Yeah.
It might be a little less right now.
So
four something billion.
This just represents what our payments are going to be for the 13-14 school year.
So our total debt right now that we're looking at, and whatever that horizon is 4.5 billion.
Years,
30 years.
Right.
Okay.
Certainly be added to as the district probably goes into the next decade with another bond issue. On the federal fund side, I'll just cover this briefly since Mr. Roberts is going to have a presentation regarding the federal fund. But these 6 funds here represent about 89 to 90% of all the federal funds we expect to receive during the 13-14 school year. These numbers do represent the sequestration that has been taken out of it, and they also represent some estimated roll forward for those numbers. So if you were to see another number, for instance, for Title I, that was a bit less than the 88 million, it may not have the roll forward number included in that particular amount. Here's where we are. Within the general fund, based on our estimates of revenues and expenditures, we're at about a negative $20 million deficit. We're very confident that we can get that to a zero in the work that we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. Of course, food service and debt service are both at zero right now. So again, there's not much work that's going to happen with either of those two funds, but the budget department is working diligently with direction from the superintendent, myself, on how to get that net to a zero so we can have a balanced budget. Board policy does require the board to have a balanced budget, which will be adopted on June 27th. So $20 million represents approximately 2% for us to try to get that down to zero. Now, one thing that you may have heard is that right now this does factor in 100% occupancy rates. So of the 16,400 FTEs that we're projecting to be in the general fund, the assumption is that every one of those is going to be filled next year starting on July 1. We know that's not true because we do have a certain percentage of positions that are not filled throughout the year. Across the board, principals, APs, teachers certainly being the largest group. But right now this is recognizing 100% occupancy, so we know that that number is going to come down.
What's our vacancy rate right now?
I do not have that. That's an HCM question.
Two questions. I looked at the Imagine 2020 data, and then we'd had conversations back from when it was Race to the Top of a lot of additional FTEs going in that strategic feeder pattern.
Yes.
So those of us who've been on the commission for a while, immediately the comparability alarm goes off. Now, someone, I think it was Byron, told me, well, some of this is grant funded, and so does that exempt it from comparability?
Well, had we received the money from Race to the Top, then comparability would not have been an issue. But because we internalized it and made it general fund dollars, then of course the comparability have been run and are always being run by budget and grants to make sure that we're not going to be in violation. So this district seems to be very in tune with comparability, more so than any other district I've ever experienced. But the fact of the matter is, they're running these constantly on an FTE perspective because there's, I believe, 3 different tests that you can use. Is that correct, Jordan? For the comparability, and we use the one that gets us a pass on comparability.
Can we see a copy of those? And
yeah, in fact, I think I just sent those to a board member who asked for them not that long ago. So yeah, we have the data. So we can. I'll send it to James so he can give it to you.
Well, one of our we have a history of where it came into issue. And
exactly, that's what I've been told. So, but yeah, I think that we're looking at it, and when the question comes from the board, well, how is this going to affect comparability? The minute that we're doing anything that's going to affect it, we simply will put the brakes on and say we can't do it. In fact, that has happened many times over the last couple of months as we've been looking at the Imagine 2020 and trying to do different things with it, and both budget and grants will come in and say we can't do this because we won't meet comparability, so then we have to kind of change where we're going. So it's being looked at constantly, so we don't run into the same problems we ran into whenever that was here in the district.
Second question is, and it's a generality, and it's something I'm trying to understand based on back when we had our presentation on federal programs, we saw the numbers about unspent federal dollars, but then there's this carryover fact, and but we talked about different strategies that other districts have to push those dollars, to manage those dollars, to maximize them. But at the campus level, I guess, and it's just, data points here and here, a soft survey, to say the least, that campuses have lost budget flexibility year to year. They have less flexibility going in this budget cycle because of some mandates coming from headquarters.
You're referring to the new model, the instructional coach model. As we're phasing it in over the next few years, what it has done is, again, from a comparability perspective, I always use the analogy, the bag of money that has dropped off in front of the campus, it says Title I on it for them to use for supplementary reasons, not supplanting, of course. It's now coming with a list of instructions, as they always have, regarding the things you can and can't do with federal funds. That's pretty de rigueur for a school district. Everybody knows, you can't supplant, so here's what you can and can't do. What's changing now is some of those dollars that are attributed to your campus are now being used in a way that you have to fund an instructional coach or two, or whatever it is that you're allowed to within the amount of money that you have available. So what that means is that if you had been buying other kinds of FTEs with your dollars, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. You're going to have to buy instructional coaches over the next 2 or 3 years to get to where the model the superintendent wants. It's still providing support to the campuses. It's just a different way of approaching how we're giving the money to the campuses and then kind of walking away and letting them do what they want versus those campuses that maybe haven't been successful in the past. So again, this is a new development coming from 3700 Ross that's saying we're going to use the instructional coach model for next year and the foreseeable future. So regarding the flexibility, yes, they're not going to have as much as they've had in the past, but again, the powers that be think that this model is going to be more effective than what the campuses have been doing in the past.
Does it better utilize the whole bucket of federal dollars?
Yeah, well, you know, federal funds in every district I've been in, I'm sure James, when he was down in Northeast, are problematic. What you're always trying to do is find that sweet spot between getting the funds in the summer when you get your first notice of grant award, the NOGA, and then structuring your program around those dollars. But within the federal side, they also have vacancy rates as well. So even though you have best intentions, let's say it's $10 million, at the end of the day, you may be running a 3 or 4% vacancy rate, because sometimes people are a bit skittish about being federally funded because they're thinking that that means my job is going to be gone the next year. So sometimes you don't have takers for those positions, and what that creates is this carry forward. In addition, in most districts, all of a sudden in the spring, you get another allocation, which is more money in your lap that you can't even spend the money you had to begin with. So we have to work through that to make sure that within Title I, for instance, that you don't exceed, I believe it's a 15% carry forward. Is that correct? Yeah, I always get that mixed up with the 25%. So it's a constant changing of how you're using your federal dollars that is hoping to supplement what you're doing with the general fund.
Well, would the instructional coach be is that a full-time position? Do you know?
Yes.
It would be. Okay, and would that be for every school? That Title I school, of course, but most of our schools are here.
Right, the majority of them are title. That's correct.
So it would be. Would they be able to hire more than one?
If they have the funds.
They have the funds in their Title I.
And I don't know if Jordan is going to cover that, but
I was jumping ahead. I forgot.
There are ratios that there are ratios.
Cool. We're almost done.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just trying to see how that maybe Silk Team.
So for instance, if based on your enrollment that the ratio says that you should have 3, but you can only afford 1 the first year, the plan is to phase into that, so you have 2 the next year and then 3 the year after that, assuming the ratios don't change based on your enrollment.
They're full-time employees. Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay.
And just maybe, are schools being encouraged or told that it would be okay to write a waiver to this if they have a better plan or like a really concrete plan about that?
To my knowledge, I don't know.
Okay, and then do we have any clue where all these instructional coaches are coming from?
Well, once the positions are posted, then it's like any other position in the district, is finding the right candidate for those particular positions.
The principal is able to select.
I don't know if the principal, along with their ED, I've heard different versions of exactly how they're going to procure these particular instructional coaches, but I can't speak to that because that's not in my particular.
Are these coming from outside? I mean, is it open to outside the district, inside the district? Do we know that?
If it is, yes, ma'am.
And are the coaches working with the kids or with the teachers, or what? They're just, the teachers will just go and work with them
That is my understanding.
individually.
So that could be a replacement of your Silk Team.
When will we see a copy of the real budget, the official budget, rather than this presentation?
Real budget. What do you mean real budget? What is it?
Well, I know you're new here. This commission in the past has been provided a copy of the draft with all the functions and the orgs, so we can drill down through the thousands of pages and take a look at it in that detail. And then every time there's a new draft, we've been provided that draft so we can do some comparisons.
Ask Jim to answer that.
Yeah, sure. We right now it's just going to be draft, but we probably have something close to the end of the week.
Are you at a point where you've got a 1.2.0? I mean, I was looking at last year's recommendation. The recommendation was based on 3.0, and are we using that terminology?
Ended up at, I think 4.5, but. Yeah, we're working on Gilbert right back here.
You won't have a 3.0 by the end of the week.
No.
Okay, but are you using that staging
version? I mean,
Okay, but right now we're in.
Well, we'll have something for you by the end of the week. So.
Thank you, Mr. Terry.
Yeah.
On page 62, when you had the general fund expenditures, the FTE analysis, are these the increase in teachers planned for 13-14? The change of about 207 teachers. Are these changes in campus leadership, about 63 more positions? Is that all for that feeder pattern, the 2020 strategic, or whatever we're calling it now? Is that mostly going there, or is it being spread throughout the district?
There's also, I believe, 14 additional APs, if I remember correctly, Gilbert, that are also being dispersed district-wide, and then...
Is that considered under campus leadership, those 63
That's
extras?
correct, yeah.
Okay, so there's 14 APs? Okay, and those are being distributed, but what about these teachers and...
It's based on the staffing ratio changes that were made.
Without the brown sheet, so to speak, you can't see it. But if you look at this, which I know Michael has a copy, but you can see the additions go into the strategic feeder pattern.
Okay, so that's not being spread to the district. Now, did we go? I'll read this at the end of this year.
Well, you have to remember that the staffing ratios are applied consistently across the whole district, and that any additional Imagine 2020 supplement to the strategic feeder patterns, they can't just dump teachers any other FTEs without being comparable. So it's within those comparabilities. So there are more, but I do believe, and Gilbert can attest to this, but I do believe that most of those additional 200 teachers actually came not from the feeder from the Imagine 2020, but from the changes in the staffing ratios. And those staffing ratios were developed by HCM and school leadership together. So there's a little bit of adjustment. I believe that one of the big changes was we're now staffing elementaries. We changed that ratio from 1 to 24 to 1 to 23. So that's going to be probably the biggest chunk of them at the elementary level.
Debbie, do you have a question? Quick question on Imagine 2020. Do you know how many teachers and leaders are impacted on this incentive pay?
If it wasn't covered in that Carrie, I think Carrie Holt, or maybe the superintendent covered that.
Oh, okay. All right.
The Title I SI rolls to 211, which is the Title I funding number. What is the SI? I can't recall what that is.
School improvement?
School improvement?
I had the same thing, yeah.
Those campuses, AYP.
And so those funds will roll over to just the regular Title I funds, the 211, instead of having...
They roll forward into their own fund.
Right.
Okay.
So only the 70 schools are eligible for it.
So they're separate, but when it all gets reported from...
Under the 211.
It goes to 211, that's correct, yeah.
You're on.
Yes. All right. Good evening, everyone. So we're going to discuss our preliminary federal budget. I think Renee's gone over most of it, so that's good. So we can go fast. On this first slide is kind of our major federal funds that we kind of look at that are above $2.5–3 million. The big ones: Title I, II, IDEA B, TIPS, Perkins. We're seeing, as Renee covered, we're seeing about a $7 million loss due to sequestration. Overall, we're going to see about a $22 million loss. That's due $7 million for sequestration, $14 million because 2 of our TIPS campuses are ending this year. So that was about $7 million right there. And then the other ones we've actually drawn down some, be able to spend down some of that roll forward we've been carrying primarily in IDEA B and Title II and school improvement. We can see the FTEs, we're looking at about 1834. This is a decrease of about 47 positions from the current year, where we currently are. Here's just a breakdown between campus and non-campus for our projected awards, just by percentage. The red being non-campus, blue being campuses. Some of the bigger funds are, if they're all blue, they're usually going to be a total campus award. For instance, TIPS goes all to the campuses, school improvement. And some of the other ones, there you see like a bigger non-campus projection. A lot of the, like for instance, IDEA B holds a lot of money in contracted services that are going out to the campuses. Also, at the beginning of the year, they hold money in reserve. So once kids are migrate across the district, they can shift out an FTE from their central operation and put the money onto the campus. But this is kind of where we are right now in the planning stages. The next slide shows the FTE breakdown, the same type of analysis, campus versus non-campus. You can see the FTEs by fund, campus by non-campus on this. One thing to note on the school improvement funds, we currently have around 48 positions, and we're decreasing those funds because we're being told that school improvement funds are going to be cut at a greater percentage than most other federal funds, mainly because the way the state has to allocate once they receive their money from the federal government is they'll take their administration costs off the top, and then a certain proportion is set aside for school improvement. They're going to use that to flatten out the entire state. Also, in addition, there's going to be more schools coming into school improvement, thus everyone's not going to actually receive enough funding. So we're told that funding will be cut 45 to 50%. Rather than the 5% everyone else was being told that we were being cut.
So in general, campus FTEs are going to be decreased this next year?
Decreased, it looks about, actually it's going to be an increase in campuses allocations by about 57.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Title I campus allocations. We have about, right now we're looking at 221 Title I schools, 14 non-Title I schools. That includes Pearl C, so there's really true 13 schools for next year that won't be served. Here's how we break down how the campuses receive their money. We do it in a grade span fashion within these two ranges of economically disadvantaged percentage. So those campuses receiving have a higher percentage, over 75%, receive a higher dollar amount per pupil. You can see the breakdown by high school, middle school, elementary, and if they're less than 75%, 450, 410, and 370. To receive Title I funds, you have to be at or greater than 35% to receive Title I. 40% makes you school-wide, meaning you have the flexibility to use the money on anything on the campus. If you're targeted, you have to identify a certain amount of students that you can utilize the funding for. We only have one targeted school this year that we're planning for this year. I think last year we had Travis, and I think this year it's going to be Dealey. Mm-hmm. One of Dealey's. They're two orgs. They're right at 35%.
That's all right. So the lever starts when you hit 35.
35%, you're eligible to receive service. The next slide goes to the instructional coach allocation, how the model is kind of driven. Again, it's broken out by grade span. So you can see the elementary 0 to 300 will receive at least one allocation for instructional coaches. That varies across the different grade spans, going all the way up to 5 at the high schools that are greater than 1,500 enrollment. This is enrollment based on economically disadvantaged enrollment, not base enrollment. The principals have the flexibility to reduce this number. For instance, if they're at the high end of the spectrum, they can go from 5 to 3, 4 to 2, 2 to 1. They can reduce down. Some campus. Oh, sorry.
And use the money for a different program.
For a different purpose, exactly.
They already had something in place that they don't want to disband.
Correct. If they had teachers or something that they were going to be funding, they wanted to continue those for 1 year and then transition to the next year. They could reduce the number of coaches they were intending to hire. This goes on to some of our central programs that we're going to be funding. A lot of them right now are pretty much the same thing that we're funding now. It's just looking at the dollar amounts. Title I funds the majority of our summer schools. The Reconnection program, half of the youth and family centers across the district. Reasoning Mind software, I think we're expanding to the 4th grade this year, so that'll see an increase. And college access programs. Title II will be funding class size reductions as it usually does. Right now, we're currently budgeting 104 teaching units. Teacher recruitment and retention, and instructional support services, which will offer professional development across the core content areas for next year. Title III, again, they also support summer school, and then also give teacher assistants and instructional coaches to the campuses. IDEA, deaf education, behavior programs. They also, like I said, give FTEs out to the campuses, and then also provide support from the central level. Perkins, they also have a STEM career and tech staff of 7 FTEs that support campuses, and they also usually buy the capital equipment to upgrade any facilities across the district. This is just,
STEM as we know it, the science and engineering.
Science and engineering, yes. Correct.
Particular teachers, or what is it funding there?
It's usually materials. Materials is usually what this grant is going to be used for.
Special projects for?
Special projects, updating a lot of the site software, things like that. The next slide is a comparison of amounts by org type between this year and next year. As you can see, obviously the decreases from this year to next year based on sequestration and our grants being limited this year. The same information, but except doing FTE analysis and comparison, you can see we are increasing at the central level, mainly because the difference there are the special ed units. Like I said, they're out at campuses right now, but for the 13-14 planning, they're at central. So eventually they're going to move out to campuses. So while that number looks like we've increased, we're actually going to decrease by the end of it once they get shifted out to campuses.
Where they're budgeted or where they're physically located?
Both.
Okay.
That's it.
How'd we get through without asking about E-rate?
Time's up.
We're just not. We're not. It's a.
The check's in the mail, but
okay.
Money comes in, great. If it doesn't, well, we've been without it for 7 or 8 years. So.
How much are you expecting?
I've heard anywhere between 20 and 30 million, possibly going back to the 2005-2006 year. But again, a lot of people are talking about that as if it's a sure thing. But until it comes in, you know, we're planning the budget based on known revenue streams, and that's if it comes in, great. The notion that we are now no longer under E-rate compliance is not true. We still are under a compliance agreement, but the HOLDS, H-O-L-D-S, have been taken off of some funding, which means that there is a better likelihood that during the 13-14 year that money will start to flow. So.
Where in the budget, I don't know if it's under our regular budget, do we have budgeted in something for remediation, for not summer school, but for remediation for the kids that have failed the state testing? You know, we used to do that for the tax. We have remediation. Do we have that?
It's the Reconnection program. They're at all the high school campuses.
Okay.
They're
so
labs
is that
to get
under
credit
grants
recovery.
then? Does that fall under yours?
Well, we fund it. It's out of Title I.
Okay, and so it's under Title I, how much does that cost? Do we know?
It's roughly, I got that number for you. 1 second.
Gilbert, do we have any money in the GL?
About $6 million last year, right?
Okay.
This includes the tutoring programs that you have for the schools.
The Reconnection program?
Reconnection, let's say Big Thought. How are they paid? They're paid out of what?
Big Thought has several grants that they operate. They also do partner with us for summer school, though. Yes.
Summer school.
2.7 million.
2.7?
That's FTEs. There's a teacher that runs every lab and for the software for the credit recovery. It's called NovaNet, I believe is the name of it.
And so it's considered credit recovery when the kids, like when they don't pass the ELCs, or, you know, we're transitioning right now, but all those freshmen and now the sophomores this year are under the ELC program. So they
started,
have to pass.
Yeah, we started that last year, and it was they merged it with summer school as a component of summer school.
Okay. Okay.
Now, where does the funding come for Century 21 after-school programs?
21st Century?
21st Century.
It's a state grant.
It's a state grant.
Yes.
You still getting?
No, Big Thought receives the award, and we receive the service from
So
them.
the tutoring, you don't pay teachers any longer to stay after school to tutor?
Within the campuses do that. Yes.
Can you use Title I funds to do
Correct. Yes, they do.
How have campuses paid for Concilio before?
Title I.
And so this change in budget structure, does that reduce their flexibility to go out and subscribe?
Right now, it looks like they currently have about $13 million in discretionary funding. For next year, it looks like they'll have about $8 million. So there will be a reduction in the discretionary spending.
And does that? And if a campus wanted to pursue that, do they have the funds on campus, or do they subscribe? Do they make an appeal to you to get that?
It would come from within their campus budget.
Dan?
Well, I'd like to raise Renee's response to the question about E-rate, and that it was very conservative. But in asking Don Smith what we potentially had on the table, all told, that is kind of waiting to be processed, that is not in the bank yet, but the number was more in the $140 million range for old E-rate money that has been withheld from us. And when we get it, we'll get it, as Renee was saying. But I think that number has a lot larger upside than 20 or 30 million.
It was also suggested to me that some of that is we're going to be reimbursed for it, but we can't get it until we've actually spent it, because some of it's, or until the capital project is complete. Have you heard that?
Yeah, it's a.
And then the money goes back to capital.
With E-rate, and you have to get it back from vendors, and not sure I can talk about all the details, but I do want to say the
There's upside
is very high, and I think Renee is being responsible by not counting it until we have it in the bank. But the hope is that the number will be upwards of 140 million.
Would that go into the general fund then? Or does that stay with technology projects?
Well, I think the way it works is that money is fungible, so the technology that we have been buying with the general fund, the money we've been paying for technology out of the general fund during this period of time when we couldn't get E-rate funds will, in a sense, be when we get it.
Some of it will flow directly to the general fund. Some will actually, I believe, flow back to some construction funds because they were paid for with that. And so, again, Don Smith will be the one to, when the money does come in, he tells us what this is for exactly, so we treat it properly, so we don't get into trouble again.
Were there any bond funds that were used to pay for E-rate?
I believe that there were some projects that were funded out of bond funds. They go back there. That's why we have to make sure, what are we getting?
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
Lucy?
What would the cost be for elementary to bring us down to 1 to 22? So if we went instead of from 1 to 24 to 1 to 23, what would it cost to go to 1 to 22, which is the state? So we wouldn't have to ask for cost escalation.
10 million, 12 million, because it would take probably another 200 teachers.
So if we got E-rate money, we could do that. Or if we didn't have as much of the reserves.
I mean, that's a one-time money, and then if you do add 200 teachers, that's a continuing cost, so there's an imbalance there. It's one thing to buy buses, it's another thing to buy FTEs, which then you don't have that E-rate money coming in every year, so you'll be careful with that.
Just one other question. I know people want to go home. It was established some time ago that some of the Title I funds had not been expended during the school year, and that, of course, you lose that money. Do you have specialists or people going out helping the schools to make sure that they help monitor the spending of those funds so that we won't have to lose it?
Yes, we have a compliance specialist for each division that goes out and monitors the schools twice a year.
Twice a year? Okay. All right.
Monitoring is a little bit different than helping. Doesn't Houston have a program where they actually help instruct the principals on how to better both apply and spend the Title I funding? I know it's a very expensive proposition to have someone at each school do that kind of mentoring, but But we don't really have a mentoring program here.
No, we usually just set the guidelines on how you can spend it,
Right.
and then help them out if they call and they're like, how can we do X program, and then we would help them leverage their budget to fund it.
So the Dallas is one per, what do you call it after ED, region?
Division.
Division, thank you. One per division, and we don't know what Houston is, but they might have
schools does that include? One per
It's like I've got it.
It's two
It's
feeder
like 4
patterns.
high schools, 4 feeder patterns. So that can be a lot of schools.
A lot of schools, yeah.
All right, thank you. And I think our next meeting's the 6th.